The morning light spilled across the rolling hills, casting a golden glow over acres of corn ready to be harvested. Birds flitted through the sky, their calls mingling with the rustle of stalks swaying in a gentle breeze. For Jacob, mornings like this were more than beautiful. They were sacred. He stood at the edge of his field, boots planted firmly in the soil, breathing in the scent of dew and earth. This was not just another day. It was the start of the harvest he had worked toward all year. Every seed he planted, every weed he pulled, every storm he endured had led to this moment. He smiled to himself, whispering, "Time to bring it home." The old green tractor waited beside the barn, its paint faded from years under the sun, but its engine still faithful. Jacob ran his hand over the cool metal, remembering the mornings he had climbed up beside his father as a boy, holding on tight as the machine rattled down the same dirt roads. That tractor wasn't just a tool. It was history, family, and livelihood rolled into one. When the key turned, the engine roared awake, coughing once before settling into a steady rhythm. The vibrations shook through Jacob's hands, grounding him in the work ahead. To outsiders, it might look like just an old piece of machinery, but to Jacob, it was a partner. "We've got another season in us, old friend," he murmured, steering it toward the field. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, Karen stood on her manicured porch, sipping coffee from a porcelain mug. Her SUV gleamed in the driveway, polished daily until it reflected the sky itself. She had been president of the HOA for 3 years and wore that title like a crown. To her, every lawn should look trimmed, every driveway spotless, every house quiet. But what annoyed her most was Jacob's farm. She despised the smell of soil and fuel, the distant rumble of tractors, and the fact that his work didn't fit into her picture-perfect suburban ideal. As she watched his tractor move down the lane, her lips curled in disapproval. "One day, I'll put a stop to this nonsense," she muttered. Jacob was used to her antics by now. Every month, another letter appeared in his mailbox. Noise complaint. Tractor parked too close to the road. Dust on community property. Each letter ended with Karen's bold signature, like a stamp of authority. Most neighbors ignored her demands, but Jacob had land, and land meant work, something Karen never seemed to understand. He would read the letters at night, shaking his head with a laugh. "You can't harvest corn with a pair of scissors, Karen," he'd joke to himself. Still, he knew Karen's persistence wasn't going to vanish. Deep down, he suspected her frustration would one day boil over. That afternoon, the sun sat high, casting sharp shadows across the cornfield. Jacob guided his tractor down the narrow dirt lane beside his crops, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. The steady hum of the machine blended with the rustle of the stalks, and for a moment, life was simple. Then, from behind, the growl of another engine broke the peace. Jacob glanced over his shoulder and frowned. A sleek black SUV sped around the bend, its tires spitting dust as it came dangerously close. He recognized it immediately. "Karen," he muttered, tightening his grip on the wheel. It happened in a flash. The SUV swerved too close, and before Jacob could react, screech! Metal scraped against steel. The jolt rattled through the tractor, throwing Jacob forward in his seat. Corn stalks bent and snapped under the force, leaves and dust swirling into the air. His heart pounded as he brought the tractor to a stop. He climbed down quickly, eyes scanning the damage. His tractor bore only a faint scrape, but Karen's glossy SUV had a long, ugly scar stretching across the side. Jacob sighed heavily, bracing himself for the storm he knew was coming. Karen burst out of the driver's seat like a storm breaking free. Her heels clicked sharply on the gravel as she marched toward Jacob, pointing furiously at the damage. Her voice was shrill, echoing across the quiet field. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This is thousands of dollars of damage. You farmers think you can block roads like it's your property?" Jacob stood tall, arms resting at his sides, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to her fury. "Ma'am, you clipped me. You were speeding. This road isn't meant for—" But she cut him off, her face flushed red. "Don't you dare lecture me about rules. You'll pay for this!" Instead of arguing, Jacob leaned against the tractor, his posture relaxed, his voice low and steady. Karen, this is harvest season. Tractors are allowed on this road. I didn't hit you. You swerved too close. His words were measured, like a teacher correcting a child. But Karen wasn't listening. She threw her hands up dramatically, her SUV reflecting the sun behind her. Typical. Always excuses. You farmers think you're above the law. Well, not this time. Her anger wasn't just about the scratch. It was about her pride, and she wasn't about to let that pride bend. With shaking fingers, she snatched her phone from her purse. That's it. I'm calling the police. She raised her voice deliberately, making sure the few neighbors within earshot could hear. Yes, officer, I've been hit by a reckless tractor driver. My car is ruined. Please hurry! Jacob exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't protest, didn't try to stop her. Years of farming had taught him that sometimes silence was stronger than words. Call whoever you need, he said softly. Then, almost casually, he climbed back into his tractor and began working the next row of corn, the engine humming steadily as if nothing had happened. Karen's shouts carried through the neighborhood like a siren. One by one, people stepped out of their homes, curiosity pulling them closer. Some leaned on fences, shaking their heads knowingly. Others whispered to each other, "Here we go again," as they recognized Karen's voice. Children peeked from porches, wide-eyed, watching the scene unfold like a live performance. Karen stood in the lane, pacing in circles, waving her arms dramatically as if she were on stage. Meanwhile, Jacob kept working the field, the tractor's hum drowning out her theatrics. To the crowd, it was clear. One was harvesting corn, the other was harvesting attention. The sound of police sirens soon broke the quiet hum of the countryside. Red and blue lights flickered against the golden corn as a patrol car rolled up the narrow lane. Karen straightened her blazer, smoothed her hair, and practiced a look of distress. To her, this was her moment. The stage was set. The officers were her audience, and she was ready to perform. Jacob parked the tractor neatly at the edge of the field and stepped down calmly, dusting his hands against his jeans. He didn't need to rehearse anything. The truth, he knew, didn't need practice. The moment the officers stepped out, Karen rushed forward, nearly tripping over her heels in her hurry. She pointed at her SUV dramatically, then at Jacob, her words tumbling over each other. "He crashed into me!" He was driving recklessly, blocking the road. "Look at my car, it's ruined because of him. This is against HOA rules." One officer raised an eyebrow while the other jotted notes silently. Behind them, a few neighbors stifled chuckles, already predicting how this would play out. Jacob stood quietly, hands in his pockets, his calm presence only making Karen's theatrics seem louder. The officers walked slowly around the SUV, crouching to study the scratches. They then circled Jacob's tractor, noting its position and the height of the wheel that bore faint marks. It didn't take a trained eye to see the truth. The damage lined up perfectly with the SUV swerving too close. One officer looked at Jacob. "Were you driving in your lane, sir?" Jacob nodded. "Yes, officer. I was harvesting. Tractor's been here the whole time." She came around fast and clipped me. The officers exchanged a glance, both realizing the farmer's words matched the evidence. Before Karen could speak again, a neighbor stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer. I saw the whole thing. Karen was speeding. The tractor never moved out of its lane." Another neighbor chimed in, then another, each confirming Jacob's story. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. She spun toward the crowd. "You're all against me!" "Of course you'd side with him. You all hate the HOA rules." But the murmurs from the crowd only grew stronger. A tide of voices lifting Jacob's quiet truth above Karen's shouting. Karen's hands shook as she dug into her purse, pulling out a binder filled with HOA documents. Pages fluttered in the breeze as she flipped frantically. "See, it's right here. HOA regulations state that farming equipment should not block community roads." She held the papers up like holy scripture. The officers glanced at the pages but didn't even bother to read them. "Ma'am, state law overrides HOA guidelines, and during harvest season, tractors have full right to use these lanes." Their tone was firm but patient. like parents explaining to a child why bedtime is non-negotiable. Finally, one officer closed his notepad and spoke clearly. "Ma'am, based on the evidence and witness accounts, the collision was caused by your vehicle swerving into the tractor. The farmer is not at fault." His voice carried finality, slicing through the tension like a blade. Karen's mouth fell open. "What? No! This can't be—" But the officer raised a hand gently. "I'd advise you not to make false reports again. That could result in serious consequences." The crowd of neighbors grew quiet, all eyes on Karen, waiting to see how she would react now that her show had ended. Her face turned crimson as she clutched her binder tightly against her chest. She glanced around, realizing every neighbor had witnessed her downfall. The polished, commanding president of the HOA now looked small, almost fragile, standing in the middle of a dusty country road. For a moment, she opened her mouth as if to argue again, but no sound came out. Instead, she huffed, stomped her foot like a child denied a toy, and spun on her heel. Karen climbed into her SUV, slamming the door so hard it echoed across the fields. She gripped the wheel, refusing to look at anyone as she started the engine. Slowly, the vehicle rolled forward, its once pristine shine dulled by the long, glaring scratch down its side. The neighbors watched her go, some whispering, some shaking their heads, others chuckling softly. Jacob simply returned to his tractor without a word, the engine humming back to life as Karen's taillights disappeared over the hill. That evening, as the sky turned pink with sunset, neighbors began showing up at Jacob's farmhouse. One brought a homemade pie, another carried a casserole, and others brought small gifts of thanks. "You stood your ground, Jacob," one of them said. About time, someone showed Karen that rules don't mean bullying. The farmhouse, usually quiet at night, filled with warmth and laughter. Jacob felt humbled, grateful, and a little surprised. He had faced the storm alone at first, but the community had stood with him when it mattered most. Later that night, Jacob walked back out to his fields. The corn stood tall, glowing faintly under the moonlight. He placed a hand on one stalk, thinking of the day's chaos. Harvesting corn was one thing, but harvesting patience, truth, and dignity was another. He smiled to himself, the tractor parked safely nearby, its old paint gleaming faintly. Karen's shouting had faded, but the lesson remained. Sometimes the real victory wasn't in winning an argument. It was in letting the truth stand strong, just like the golden rows of corn that would always outlast the noise.